All right, good afternoon. The Secretary General will be arriving in Geneva a bit later today, where he is scheduled to speak tomorrow at the high-level pledging event on the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. He's also scheduled to hold bilateral meetings on the margins of that event. The Secretary General is expected to do a brief press encounter in Geneva after the conference, and that will be up on the UN webcast page. And he's expected back in New York tomorrow afternoon. Turning to Syria, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that nearly 130,000 people have left eastern Ghouta following weeks of fighting. The UN and partners are responding to the mounting humanitarian needs of those displaced with food, shelter, health, and other assistance and protection services. However, the needs remain very high. Humanitarian partners also continue to deliver assistance through the Syrian Arab Red Crescent to people in Ain Tarma, Sabka, Harasta, and other places inside eastern Ghouta. The UN continues to call for safe, unimpeded, and sustained access to all in need, and any evacuation of civilians must be safe, voluntary, and to a place of their choosing. It is imperative that civilians have the right to return as soon as the situation allows. Regarding the situation in Afrin, the United Nations continues to be concerned for the safety and protection of civilians impacted by the ongoing hostilities and reported restrictions of movements. An estimated 137,000 people have been displaced to Tal Rifat and to the surrounding villages where fighting has recently intensified, posing new protection risks for civilians in the area. Also, you will have seen that we put out over the weekend a statement on Liberia on the day marking the conclusion of the mandate of the UN mission in Liberia. The Secretary General congratulated the people and government of Liberia for their determination to turn the page on crisis and conflict. As United Nations peacekeeping departs Liberia, the Secretary General stated his appreciation for the essential contribution of all partners in the Liberian peace process over the years, particularly the Economic Community of West African States, whose green helmets laid the foundation for UN peacekeepers in Liberia. And turning to Nigeria, the Deputy Humanitarian Coordinator in Nigeria, Yasin Gaba, today strongly condemned the deadly attack which took place near Belle village in the outskirts of Borno State's capital, Maiduguri, on yesterday. Dozens of civilians were reportedly killed and many more were injured. Mr. Gaba said innocent civilians continue to suffer daily from direct and indiscriminate attacks in the northeast part of the country. He called on all parties to the conflict to end this violence and to respect human life and dignity. In recent weeks, there have been continued attacks on civilians in the three most conflict-affected states in Adamawa, Borno, and Yobe in the northeast part of Nigeria. Since the beginning of the year, at least 120 civilians, women and children and men have reportedly been killed, and over 210 people have sustained serious injuries in over 22 attacks, allegedly by non-state armed groups directly targeting civilians. And the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator Ursula Mueller is traveling today to Myanmar, where she will be for a week. The purpose of the mission is to observe firsthand the impact of the crisis in Rakhine State and to the conflict in Kachin and Shan states, and to discuss ways to improve the humanitarian response. Her mission will include meetings in Yangon and Naypyidaw, as well as field visits. During her stay in Myanmar, Ms. Mueller is expected to meet with people impacted by the humanitarian crisis, senior government officials, and humanitarian partners. Following this, on Sunday, she will travel to Indonesia to attend the ASEAN-UN annual regional meeting. And the World Food Programme today airlifted life-saving nutrient-dense biscuits from its humanitarian depot in Dubai to Papua New Guinea. The plane carried enough food to feed approximately 60,000 people who've been impacted by the earthquake. More than 270,000 people continue to require humanitarian assistance following the 7.5 magnitude quake which struck the country in February. The earthquake was followed by a series of severe aftershocks through March, causing widespread panic among communities. Papua New Guinea already faced severe food insecurity and alarming malnutrition levels before the earthquake. And today, the United Nations team in Afghanistan welcomed the progress made by the Independent Electoral Commission in setting an October 2018 date to hold parliamentary and district-level elections. The head of the UN mission, Tadamichi Yamamoto, said this is a positive and important development in the work of the Commission that will allow progress from the formal planning stages to implementation. He added that the participation of all Afghans is critical and reiterated the United Nations' commitment to support and strengthen the electoral process in the country. And today is World Autism Awareness Day. The theme this year is empowering women and girls with autism. In the message for the day, the Secretary General said we must stand up to the rights of people with autism and speak out against discrimination. He added the United Nations work for gender equality and women's empowerment must reach all of the world's women and girls, including those with disabilities, and ensure that they have the freedom to make their own choices and participate in the creation of policies that concern them. At this morning, ECOSOC chamber, there was an event to mark the day with experts and advocates looking at the challenges that women and girls with autism face today. If you missed it, you can watch it on the webcast. After we are done here, and you're also done with Mr. Brendan Varma, there will be a briefing in this room by Ambassador Gustavo Meza Cuadra, the permanent representative of Peru to the UN and president of the Security Council for this beautiful, sunny month of April. And lastly, we say merci and gracias to our friends in Paris and Managua, as France and Nicaragua have both paid their regular budget dues in full for 2018. Which brings us to...
72.
Nope. No, but since you were the only one who played, I guess you win. So you can have the first question.
Okay.
It's 73 is the right answer, by the way.
All right. Somebody slipped in there. I wanted to ask you, I tried to ask the Secretary General, I guess it was on Thursday, about allegations at UNAIDS of retaliation by staff. And since then, as you may know, the victim or stated self-described victim of Louis Luris, Martina Brodstrom, has appeared on CNN International and described in great detail both what she says happened and the very flawed investigation. So I wanted to know, presumably even in Lisbon, this is CNN International is available. What is the Secretary General, who so far, at least to my knowledge, has said it's entirely up to UNAIDS. What does he think of this person coming forward? And also I wanted to ask you, there appear to be new allegations of sexual exploitation at the UN support office in Somalia. And I'd like you, maybe you can't do it now, but maybe you can ask OIOS for a status of the case.
On Somalia. Look, I think people are free to come forward and speak, so she has the right to do that. I think UNAIDS has, the head of the executive director of UNAIDS, I think, has sent out a letter to staff. I think he is committed to creating an environment that is free of harassment. Already, I think if you look at the progress that UNAIDS has made in the last few years towards achieving gender parity, which they have, on increasing the number of women representatives of UNAIDS in the field, I think they have done tremendous success. I know the leadership of UNAIDS, as I said, is committed to creating an atmosphere not as only free of harassment, where people feel free to come forward, and as a matter of fact, anyone who I think disagrees with investigations into their own cases also has the right to appeal the results of an investigation.
But so, just one second, does the Secretary General not believe then the Guardian article, which quotes extensively from Mr. Sidibe telling staff, "I'm going to investigate anyone that came forward"? This seems to carry more weight than a letter.
No, I think my sense is that this was not the intent of what he said, and Mr. Sidibe is committed to creating the right atmosphere at UNAIDS. Ms. Lederer.
A follow-up on Eastern Ghouta. You said 130,000 people had left. Mm-hmm. Is there a time frame for that? Is that they've left in the past week or since?
Let me get the exact time. Frame.
And is there any indication of how many people remain in Eastern Ghouta?
I should be able to do the math off the top of my head because we did have an estimate inside, but
I know it was
chalk it up to the first day
4,000.
back since vacation, but I will get you those numbers.
Thank you.
Monsieur.
Steph, struggle icon and South Africa's former First Lady, Winnie Mandela, passed away earlier today. Is there any reaction from the Secretary-General?
I think the Secretary-General is saddened by the passing of Miss Winnie Madikizela Mandela, a leading figure at the forefront of the fight against apartheid in South Africa. She was a strong and fearless voice in the struggle for equal rights and will be remembered as a symbol of resistance. The Secretary-General wishes to extend his deepest condolences to the people of South Africa as well as to her family. Nizar.
Thank you, Stéphane. Today in Hodeida, a refugee camp has been hit by an airstrike. More than 20 people were killed, mainly children and women. Any statement about that?
Yes, I think we're obviously looking into the circumstances surrounding this attack. We understand that the site had been hosting displaced families. We're still trying to gather more information. According to our estimates, between 65 and 100 families who had been fleeing the fighting elsewhere in Yemen were housed in the area. Our colleagues in Yemen have seen an initial casualty report cited in the media, but we're not in a position to confirm those reports. We're trying to get more information. As far as we know, the families have been living there for about the past 10 days. I think this is again a clear reminder of the heavy price that civilians pay in Yemen for the lack of political progress. We very much hope that with the arrival of a new UN envoy, this will give impetus to all the parties to come to the table and agree to a political settlement. And also as a reminder to all the parties of their need to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure at all costs.
Any information about the suspicious burning of aid in World Food Program warehouses in Hodeida?
No, I have no information on that.
Did you quantify the damage?
I don't have any information on that. Yes.
Stéphane, on Gaza, the Secretary General issued a statement on Friday, and he called, among others, to form an independent and transparent investigation into what happened. So, is he asking? I mean, is there going to be an independent investigation committee from the UN?
No, I think I would refer you back to the statement. The statement was a request for an investigation to be done on the ground independently of the Israeli security forces, to be done by the Israelis, but independent of the security forces. We have been through our representation on the ground. We've been in contact with the various parties, and we've seen the statements also coming out of the Israeli government on that very issue.
So, can you confirm that they're going to? I mean, as long as when I last looked, there was no statement that they are willing to.
As I said, we've seen the statements coming out from the Israeli government.
Which exactly what you are meaning? I mean that they are not going to reform.
Yeah, we've seen those. We've seen those press statements.
So are you then willing to go one step further and to do your work in this case and to form?
I think we still, we stand by what we've already said, and we'll see how the situation develops.
But sorry, it's not clear for me exactly what you're saying. So what do you mean when you stand by what you asked that they form an independent investigation committee, and they are not willing to do so? So isn't it?
As I said, we've seen the statements in the media. We'll see if we get some official confirmation. Mr. Bays.
A couple of follow-ups on that. You've seen the statements which reject the idea of the investigation independent and transparent that the SG has called for. What is your reaction to that rejection? Secondly, on the ground, are any UN staff not carrying out an investigation, but getting findings that could be used in an investigation by the UN? And a final related question. The UN Security Council, as you know, met on Friday, and yet they've been completely unable even to come up with a statement with words on this. What's the Secretary General's reaction to the fact that there's so much disunity on this particular issue?
Our colleagues on the ground have been talking to the various parties who are giving us their accounts of what happened. We are not at this point collecting information for an independent investigation because we don't have a mandate to do so, so we need to be clear on that. As for the lack of unity on the Council, I think as a matter of principle, it is something that we wish didn't happen. I think a strong Security Council on any issue is important. And it is important to show a willingness, a unified willingness of the international community. We briefed the Council as requested on Friday, and as you said, we saw the results.
Sorry, there was the first question there, which was your reaction to the Israelis coming out and saying they won't investigate.
We've seen the press statements. We will see if there are other more official statements that come our way, but we stand by our request. Mr. Lee. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Included in the Secretary General's statement on the situation in Gaza, I believe toward the end of the statement was a call to protect civilians and not involve civilians in the violence. And as far as I know, there's been no denial of the report by the Israeli Defense Force that a 7-year-old child tried to cross the security fence border and was returned to her parents by the IDF. And also there was a statement on Hamas radio broadcast saying that essentially children should be used to take down the security fence. So I'm wondering whether the Secretary General would see that kind of use of children by Hamas as breaching his understanding of protection of civilians.
I think I would refer you to what Mr. Zerihun briefing to the Security Council on Friday, and I think he mentioned the particular case of the girl being returned. Any use of deliberate use of children and putting them in harm's way is to be condemned. And in the days prior to the demonstration on Friday, Mr. Mladenov issued a statement to the media in which he reiterated the calls and emphasized the need to ensure that civilians, particularly children, should not be put in harm's way. So this is a message that was delivered to the Palestinians in discussions also to the Israelis in terms of protection of civilians in advance of the march. And I think as I said, any deliberate use of putting children in harm's way is to be condemned. Masoud, I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Stéphane. On the killing of 20 civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, including 3 children by the Indian Armed Forces, will the Secretary General call similarly for an investigation into what led to this latest killing by the Indian security forces, and will there be a similar reaction from him as in case
I think
of
the Secretary General is indeed very concerned about the situation that we've seen in Jammu and Kashmir. He reminds that member states are responsible under international humanitarian law to protect civilians. The Secretary General reiterates his call on member states to find ways to address disputes in a peaceful manner. Civilians need to be protected wherever they are, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Jammu and Kashmir, or whether it's in Yemen. It's a basic principle of this organization.
Also in the Indian occupied Kashmir.
Any loss of civilians needs to be investigated wherever they occur.
Mr. Zerihun on Friday said that he detected, or he reported at least, that there were clashes between Hamas and the Israeli army during the protests. How did he come to that conclusion? Does he have any evidence? Was any Israeli soldier hit by a bullet? Was there any shelling that can be identified on the other side of the
We
fence?
reported the facts as we were able to harvest them, and we reported them to the Security Council, and we stand by those facts.
What are your sources? How
Our
did you
sources
harvest
are
them?
varied sources of both public and private sources.
You condemned any use of children in protests. Do you condemn as well the shooting of children, arresting children in protests as well?
Look, whether any harm that comes to a child is to be condemned. Full stop. Michelle.
You mentioned that the SG is going to have some bilaterals tomorrow in Geneva. Who is he scheduled to meet with?
Off the top of my head, German officials, Swedish officials. He's also scheduled to have a sit down, obviously, with his new Yemen envoy, Martin Griffiths. We'll see who else I can tell you about. Evelyn, and then Carol, and then Linda.
Thanks. In Nigeria, in Borneo, who were the killers? Was it Boko Haram or what?
As far as we saw that it was. I mean, you've seen the press reports. As far as that we can confirm, it was armed groups.
It doesn't
but
help
we're not in a position to confirm. But obviously, there've been many reports in the media.
But the Deputy Secretary General might be in a position to confirm, no?
We have the information. She's here in New York. Right. Carol.
Stéphane, on Western Sahara, the Moroccans are complaining about new incursions in the buffer zone. Do you have any information on that?
Yes, I do. With respect to that situation, our colleagues in MINURSO have not observed any movement of military elements in the Northeast Territory. MINURSO continues to monitor the situation closely, and I will leave it at that. Mr. Bays and Mr. Lee. Linda, I'm sorry, Linda's been very patient, but go ahead, James. You've started. Finish what you've started.
Egypt.
President
Sisi is still the leader of Egypt. Many criticisms of the process. Does the UN believe his was a free and fair election?
We were not involved in the holding of the election, whether in observing or offering technical assistance, as far as I know. So I will leave it at that. Ms. Fasulo, you've been very patient.
Thank you, Steph. I have a question regarding North Korea. I was wondering if the Secretary General had any reaction or made any comments regard to the K-pop performance in Pyongyang and the importance, perhaps, of cultural diplomacy.
I can't tell you whether or not the Secretary General is a fan of K-pop. It's not a conversation I've had with him. But I do know that he does feel that cultural exchanges, sports exchanges, are important in creating a positive atmosphere. Obviously, the meat of the issue, the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, needs to be dealt with. That's the main attraction, so to speak. But it's obvious that cultural exchanges, sporting exchanges, can help thaw an atmosphere and can help provide the right context. Mr. Lee.
Sure. I wanted to ask, try to send you this in writing about in Kenya, the opposition figure Maguna was involuntarily and some say illegally deported to Dubai and has since been sent back to Canada. It's a big deal in the country and seems to, some people say it undermines the agreement by Odinga and Kenyatta. What does the UN have to say about this high-profile
I don't have any language on that at this point.
Also on Kenya, I wanted to ask you, is it the case that UN Habitat is being disbanded? Part of it moved to New York and the rest to Addis, as is being reported in and does the Secretary General believe that Habitat essentially failed in its mandate and should be moved to Addis?
No, I don't think he feels Habitat failed in its mandate. Habitat has a new leadership. They have a governing council which helps give them guidance. But beyond that, I don't have any comment.
Are they moving? I mean, I guess it seems beyond
that, I don't have any comment. Nizar.
Is the United Nations involved in any way in the evacuation of armed groups from Duma in eastern Ghouta?
I don't have anything to share with you at this point.
Another question is regarding the world trade between China and the United States. There was retaliation here today against 128 items. How does the Secretary General feel about this exchange of retaliation between the two countries?
We think that there are global multilateral mechanisms that handle global trade, and we feel those mechanisms should be used. Michelle.
Sorry, I meant to ask this before. The UN still needs more than $2 billion for Yemen tomorrow. How hopeful is the SG that you'll get it?
I think we will. I was trying to quote Kenny Rogers about counting your money at the table, but I won't. We will assess it afterwards. Shauna.
Hi. Just on North Korea, any reaction to the announcement that the Prime Minister of Japan will be meeting with Trump, and among the issues they'll be discussing will be North Korea ahead of supposedly Mr. Trump's visit? Anything you
we're all for dialogue, so I mean no particular comment, but we're all for dialogue. I will leave you with Mr. Varma.
There was a protest here Friday I wanted to ask you your comment on, just because the Secretary General was out of town.